Hello, my name is Roberto Jaramillo, and I'm here to talk to you about the lack of mental health care in prisons, and even outside of prisons. The reason I'm talking to you, Mark Zuckerberg and Priscilla Chan, is because you two are the owners of the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, shown interest in some prison reform, since your company is based in philanthropy. So going on to the first slide here, I want to talk about the current state of prisons. There's an insanely high incarceration rate in our country. Through statistics and whatnot, the U.S. has the most amount of people incarcerated in the world. We're beating even China, who has way more people in their country over ours. Yet we have more incarcerated people than them. There's also a severe, inadequate care for those with mental illnesses in prisons. Not enough resources are devoted to them. So why should we care about them in the first place? Why should we care about improving mental health care in prisons? Why? Here's some further things that are currently wrong with mental health care in prisons to give you a better idea. Right? As I mentioned before, there's an inadequate care for people with mental illnesses. Most of the time, people either do not receive any care or just don't receive the proper care that they need. They're either put into groups of people over individual care because that saves money for prisons. And here's a quote by NAMI that says about 3 in 5 people with a history of mental illness do not receive mental health treatment while incarcerated in state or federal prisons. That's about 60%. That's a lot of people. That's more than half who don't receive just any care at all. There's also the fact that the lack of care is also troublesome because it'll lead to more violence within those who need care and don't receive it. Here's another quote that says research suggests that patients with mental illness may be more prone to violence if they do not receive adequate treatment, are actively experiencing delusions, or have long-standing paranoia. That means that people who are incarcerated who don't have any way of getting help in prison may end up doing things that further leave them in prison for an extended period of time. And there is one such example, Michael Johnson. As Devote covered in a CNN article, it was mentioned that Michael Johnson suffered from hallucinations. He excoriated his own flesh, urinated and defecated on himself, and smeared feces all over his body and cell, all because he was put in solitary confinement continuously. Instead of getting the proper care that he needed while in prison, he would harm himself and absolutely defecate himself, which is just no way for someone to live. There's been problems outside of prisons that we need to address. There's not much help once people get outside of prison. There's a quote that says that people who do have health care coverage upon release from incarceration are more likely to engage in services that reduce recidivism, which means that that's good, right? That means that it works. People who get out of prison, get actual care that they need, will be less likely to get into prison, right? Sounds good. Except when you take into account that, as this quote states, a lot of budget overruns and cuts in funding for public health and mental health in many cities further put people with mental illness in situations where they're involved in criminal activity. Further complicating the picture is the lack of mental health treatment facilities. So, people who do receive help are less likely to end up back in prison. The people who don't receive help just can't. There's been lots of reductions in, as the quote states, mental health treatment facilities that people have even access to, right? Some people may even need to move to a completely different city in order to even have the opportunity to do it, let alone if they can even do it, because hell, they might not have insurance, they might not have the money to pay for it. There's also a lack of awareness in our police officers that they need more training and resources to just handle people who have mental illnesses. These two quotes point at that, right? First one is people with mental illness are arrested and sent to prison in disproportionate numbers, often due to a lack of awareness and resources in handling these individuals. The police often arrest these individuals for petty crimes such as jaywalking or wandering behavior as a preventative law and order measure. This means that a lot of people with mental illness end up in prison over the simplistic things, very simple laws that they broke, but yet they end up in prison, even though it's pretty obvious that they need Hell, another quote here is that nearly 1 in 4 people shot and killed by police officers between 2015 and 2020 had a mental health condition. That's almost 25% of people killed by police during 5 years who had a mental health condition. Instead of them getting the help that they needed, they were killed by a police officer. Now, while some situations are unfortunate, right? Maybe that other person had a gun or had a weapon or something. It still shouldn't be a police officer's first instinct to shoot and kill. What can we do about this? Here's some just potential ideas that I want to throw at you. There definitely needs to be more changes to legislation and more support services readily available in and out of prisons. Because we need to help those that are currently in prison and the people that come out of prison. So laws need to change that either factor in people with mental illness and reduce the duration of their sentence, or create all other alternatives where we put people who have a mental illness and we put them somewhere that they get the care that they need while also still not being in the general public if they've committed a crime. There also just needs to be more services available, since a lot of them have shut down over the years because of lack of money, lack of support. People have almost nowhere to go sometimes when they get out of prison. And even if they do have somewhere to go, that place might be completely full. They may not get enough care or help in that regard, even if it's there. There also needs to be an increased awareness of the general public because there's a social stigma against people who have mental illness. They hear mental illness and they think, that guy's insane, I shouldn't go near them. They have bipolar disorder, they have schizophrenia. That must mean that they're going to do something bad, either to me or to themselves, and I should be away from them, or I shouldn't treat them as just another human. So more awareness needs to be put into that to produce thoughts like that, instead of a mental illness being thought of as like a disability. There also needs to be more awareness in the police and more resources, because police already have a lot to deal with. So more resources should be allocated towards them, because they're going to be, in most instances, the people who come into first contact with the people who have a mental illness, who have not gotten care for their mental illness yet. And so they need to be more aware. They need to have more resources allocated there, so that they kill less of them, so that they can get them into the places that can actually help them and to cope with their mental illness. That's why I've been talking to you, Mark Zuckerberg and Priscilla Chan, because you guys have a company that is based in philanthropy. You've shown interest in prison reform. You've denied bills that would harm people who enter prisons. That's why I think it's also important to factor in the people who have mental illnesses, who end up in prison, who get out of prison with no help. If you were to fund more grassroots organizations who help people outside of prison, or help fund projects in the government that support grassroots organizations, or just support more awareness, anything. Simplest thing you could do is just donate some of your money to some organizations. A local one in my state here in Illinois is the Safer Foundation. I know that they deal with people who've been in prison, who've been out of prison. They deal with teenagers who've dropped out of school since the 6th grade, who are trying to work to get their GED, but can't do it the traditional way, so they're going through the Safer route, the Safer Foundation route, where they get more assistance and help for specifically passing the test. Supporting organizations like these that are nonprofit will help them to do more in the way of helping their people. We'll have a more productive society as a result. We'll have more people who commit less crimes. And overall, it'll be better for us. And that's the end.